Well, because like I'm kind of glad that you did too. So to make it kind of like bring you in on that conversation, 'cause you might actually have some to
I actually do.
Okay, yeah, go
And
ahead,
it's
go ahead.
I don't know if you
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you all have read the book. It's called Algorithms of Oppression. And I'm
Sounds
losing the
interesting.
author's name right now. I know something Nobles, I believe is her name. I will Google
So
this.
Sophia or Sophia Noble.
Yes, Sophia Noble. So Algorithms of Oppression was very interesting because it talks about how um, no piece of technology, no piece of technology is bias free because the
Yep.
people who make them
Yep.
are not bias free. So
Yeah.
something as our cities. So and way that she was talking about it was she was talking about in like search engines, particularly
Yep.
Google, and how Google always has to say they're not racist and that their search engine is racist or free of all things isms, and we know that's not true because the people who make it are not free of those isms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the
Side note,
same
I'm going
thing.
to get this book. Like this is
It was
very
Yeah,
interesting to
I
me.
really like that.
it was amazing. Who was the professor who gave it to me? Shout out to Dr. Ibad. Dr. Ibad is an actual professor at UNLV in the
Okay.
IGS department. And so shout out to Dr. Ibad. And yeah, that book was so interesting. And it started me to it had me thinking about how everything is set up. Unfortunately, everything, is made to exclude somebody
Yep.
based on some
Yeah.
type of
Because
of,
it was
of
built with
identity.
bias. Yeah, because if it's
Yeah.
built with
Yeah.
bias, that bias is going to be inherent to the system and continue to kind of grow. Like we I think the more humanized way to visualize it is just thinking about the generations.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a very hateful generation prior, there's no way that that hate's going to be completely eliminated in just one generation. It has to
Yeah.
be some sort of trickle. And with
Yeah.
that technological side, we're seeing that same kind of interaction. Every tech that we every aspect of software that we're creating, there has to be a developer that makes it. And
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
developer has their own personality, their own beliefs, so on and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
like I'm very interested like in this topic. Like I'm genuinely gonna read this book. Cause like
It's a great
even
book.
oh no, absolutely. Cause like one thing I was so through my experience being a person of color in engineering, I would have friends. A lot of them are white because it's predominant like the population within the college. And I'll never forget, still a good friend to this day. I was active with NSBE, National Society of Black
Mm-hmm.
Engineers, and he was asking me why isn't there a National Society of White Engineers? Why would that be considered quote unquote racist? And I had to break it down to him, let him know where it's like there is a standard one. It's not called white engineers, but it's the overall standard itself. When you look at the population, you
Mm-hmm.
can go to the industry standard and you'll see tons of individuals who represent the same kind of background, both racially, culturally, so on and so forth, of yourself. And then after a
Mm-hmm.
long discussion, me and him talked about it, and then he finally started to understand. But kind of seeing that there's already like studies and books on this is very interesting to me
Mm-hmm.
because I was involved with like several multicultural organizations within engineering, and there was always that question mark from somewhere, whether it was from professors, whether it was from students, so on and so forth. It's like seeing seeing how people will try to eliminate the aspect of bias on a surface level and how it would lead to further ignorance was just kind of baffling to me.
I,
These are the same individuals who would claim to be like colorblind, essentially.
yeah, and it's because we don't interrogate the things we know and how we know it.
Hmm.
I remember in high school I had to take a class called Theory of Knowledge, which was literally all about what do you know and how do you know it, and is that a reliable way of knowing something? And so when you think about like when we're talking about standard, like when you think of an American, who do you tend to think of?
White male. Well, they
Male,
actually
right?
there was a
Yeah.
show. I think it was the Jimmy Kimmel show. Yeah, they were asking like foreigners to kind of explain like what they imagine when they think American, and it was either Southern country white guy or
Mm-hmm.
California white girl. Those are like the two, and they were doing
And why?
impersonations and everything.
And why is that? How did that come to be? And then is that even true?
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
know that that's not true. but that we don't interrogate how did we come to this understanding of something or someone, and is that even a reliable way of knowing if that is even true? And then if it's not true, are you willing to change that? And that's when we start talking about like cognitive dissonance. Like once you know that something is wrong, or and then you're trying to fight with it in your mind.
That's the root of all implicit bias, though, right? Like
it is.
It is.
Absolutely is. But we have to start interrogating, how do we know what we know about, not about ourselves, about one another, about our systems, our governments, our world. Yeah. You know, Jason, you said like, you know, we think that this is how it's always been, and we know that's not true.
Yeah. But we still perpetuate, right? We still perpetuate the idea.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes one is that it's the risk of having to do something different. And the effort. Folks are lazy and folks don't. And honestly, because it takes, what we're asking people to do is to dream of what this world could be differently. And then how do we work towards that dream? Dream building is scary. Dreaming is scary. It requires us to be vulnerable. And that's not something that's also, you know, a practice of our society.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that it's also interesting. Oh, sorry, just to go back, because like there's dreaming, but there's collective dreaming. Right? Like
exactly.
You need to have the community in there too. And kind of what I wanted to go back and talk about, Darius, you brought up why isn't there a white engineering society? I was kind of thinking about like a lot of there's so much rebuttal where it's like, oh, you have like this affiliation for like people of color or something like that. Why isn't there one for white? Of course, like it's the de facto standard, but I think what white people don't understand either is like, a lot of white people can be like, hey, this is the city where I grew up in. Hey, this is like where my family's from. This is like all of these different things, which are a part of them and a part of their community. But like, I guess I don't understand like the dissonance. Is it dissonance? I'm not sure. But it's like, when it comes to personal identity, where it can be more than just like, you know, I'm a white engineer, like, I don't know. Isn't there like some connection? Like everybody says, oh, I'm 3 parts Italian. Oh, like I'm, you know, whatever. I'm half Irish. It's like, why don't you celebrate more of your Irish instead of pitting yourself against people who are minorities, like inside the country?
Well, I'll say, so that does, and there was an episode I wanted to do, kind of in the space that we're getting into, which, I might have to have that episode. That goes into like the idea of colorism and the definition of like whiteness, you know, because
sorry, my conversation points aren't too clear, by the way.
No,
it takes me a moment to develop them, so I apologize for that. But
I appreciate going on that thought journey with you.
Okay, thank you.
So, but like, I think that goes into the definition of whiteness and colorism, because the definition of whiteness as it evolved over time was much more inclusive of more European like communities. So that's why you have individuals who can come over and feel like, you know, I'm part German, I'm part Irish, I'm part Italian. But end of the day, there's much more intrigue and collective conversation being held within those particular communities. Versus when you look at others of like people of color, they're often excluded or they're unfamiliar, like willingly to, you know, stay unfamiliar, or, you know, sometimes fetishized or sexualized in just a unique way to kind of say like, here's my, you know, a form of entertainment, a way you can look at it. And like, yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
No, go ahead. Finish that thought.
Well, I'll say like, I think it goes into that space because what he was saying too, because he's also Eastern European. I'm not gonna give away his full identity just in case he's like, hey, we get text about this. But like, you know, he said that he was looking at things from like a different lens, like not being a white American. It's more so of like being European American, and how much he brought from his culture, from his country, to now being American while also being embraced by white Americans, essentially. And so a lot of us, we don't necessarily have that same kind of privilege in that regard. Mm-hmm. Like one question, because me and a friend were going to have an extended conversation on this, was like the term African American, even though I love the term because, you know, it embraces a different walk of life in America. Like there's definitely people within my community, they prefer Black American, just Black, so on and so forth. But even with that term African American, Africa is a continent.
Yeah.
Like we belong to the continent, sure, but we were kind of removed from that aspect of cultural identity to kind of, say, am I Nigerian American? Am I Ethiopian American? Versus when you look at traditional white Americans, they can go back and say, my family's Irish, a country. My family's Italian, a country. German, a country. Because with those collective countries come collective cultures and traditions and heritages. But when you just generalize the term as African American, you're dealing with an entire continent where we're now kind of a blank state. And in modern times, we had to embrace African American and Black American culture and made it our own. So we went from a blank piece of paper, but now, the influence of particularly African American, Black Americans is known worldwide. But then yet, when people still think American, do they think of me? Sorry, Mickey. Okay, I'm done.
No. I've been pondering this question. Because if you think about how whiteness or race as social currency, particularly in thinking of the American, like the United States of America, in the sense of how whiteness or race was constructed and how it's been used, that certain people of different races have more social currency than other people.
And others, yeah.
And so when you think about when particularly in the first or the second huge wave of immigration, and Irish people and Jewish people and Italian people were persecuted here in America, or in the States, as I try to be more specific in language. And at the same time, Black people were also still persecuted. You would have signs that would say, no dogs, no Jews, no Blacks. Like, for some reason, all of that existed in one sign. And there was the understanding that Black people, though, were still the bottom of the social currency barrel. And so in order to no longer be considered in the same sign of no Jews, no dogs, no Irish need apply type of things, Europeans,
like some got moved from the sign versus some stayed. Yeah.
Europeans they recognized that whiteness was a currency, and so that they had to shed their nationality or their cultural background in favor of this new racial identity, because it gave them the more social currency. Yeah. And so thinking about how race developed in this country, how race is developed, or was constructed, was solely to be able to justify the enslavement of indigenous African peoples and the genocide of indigenous people to Turtle Island, aka the United States of America. And so that snowballed into many other things as to why we can still think of, why American means white. Or that when people's like, well, why isn't there a white student engineer?
Yeah, Society of Engineers.
It's like, well, because you already have one. It's just called the regular engineering society. And that's simply because we don't often sometimes think about how race has become not only is it a social construct, but it also provides social currency.
Oh, absolutely. Jason looks like he has a thought, so that's why I paused for a little bit. But I agree 100%.
It's interesting, the idea of social currency, because it kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of privilege, right?
Oh, definitely.
And
just got off the clock, just got on my chill. Called on my homie Brent to see what be the deal. What you trying to do? I'm just trying to heal. Hella floated, never bloated's what I'm trying to feel. Hop in the whip and